Okay.
Good evening. This is the Planning Commission meeting for March 21st. It's 7:30 PM. I call the meeting to order.
It's because, is it because
Secretary will
like
take the roll.
you didn't,
Commissioner Aspinall?
here,
Brickner?
Here.
Conigan?
Here.
Grant?
here,
Manti?
Here.
Stimson?
Here.
Ware?
she's here, she's on her way in.
Right. And Chair Treflet?
Here. Thank you. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as published?
Motion to approve the agenda?
Support.
Been moved and supported. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Meetings, agenda is approved. Item 1 is the public hearing, rezoning request ZR1-1-2024. The location is 31130 Orchard Lake Road. Rezone the eastern portion of one parcel from P1 Vehicular District to B3 General Business. Tonight's action is a recommendation to City Council. The applicant is present. Okay. Joe, they go first, right?
Yep.
Ron, tell us what you want to do.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. Jeffrey Schroeder on behalf of the applicant. We were here in February 15th for the preliminary meeting and explained that we were petitioning for a rezoning. This is a split zoned parcel. We're trying to rezone the back portion of the lot from P1 to B3 to be consistent with the zoning in the entire parcel. We do have a auto wash, express auto wash that we're proposing at this location. And this rezoning is necessary in order to, meet the zoning requirements. We did review all of the staff review, and we're in agreement with the staff comments. We respectfully request a recommendation to the City Council for rezoning. I do have the owner here, Nick Hanawa, and Jacob Rillet, the engineer, if there are any further questions about the site and how this would operate if it's relevant to this commission. Thank you.
As I recall, it's an adaptive reuse of the current building, too?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
Are there any additions being made to the building, or you're just touching really inside the building for the most part?
Why don't you step up here and give your name, please, if you're going to
Jacob.
talk?
I'm Jake Rillett with Mannequin Smith. There's a very minor bump out on the northeast corner of the building. It's less than 500 square feet.
On the northeast corner?
Yeah, so the
Okay.
building currently has sort of it's not a perfect rectangle. There's a slight notch cut out of it, and we're just going to turn it into a rectangle.
Okay.
Could you repeat your name, please?
Jacob Rillett, R-I-L-E-T-T.
R.I.
L-E-T-T.
Thank you.
Is that new bump out on this property that's being rezoned?
That is on the portion that's already B3.
Okay. It's already B3. Okay.
Any other questions?
I'll have it for staff.
Okay. Barry?
Good. I know this is not before us tonight, but as far as I could tell from the plans, the entrance into the car wash and the exit to the car wash is through the southern portion of what's actually the eastern portion of the building, so you won't be anywhere near the street when they exit, because there are some problems with car washes that empty out towards the street. So that looks like this is totally taken care of. And from what I could tell, you have vacuum cleaners on the inside and vacuum cleaners on the outside?
Yes, they're both interior and exterior vacuums, and not only will cars not be exiting on the west or street side of the building, we'll be eliminating the curb cut onto Orchard Lake Road as well.
It took me a few plans to see where the ingress egress was, and I saw, oh, it's on the side. Okay, I got it. But you're getting rid of the driveway that goes out onto Orchard Lake Road now, which takes care of a different problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
Joe?
Julie is going to take this one.
Okay, Julia?
Thank you. So the subject property is just over an acre, and it's currently split zoned. The rear of the property is P1 Vehicular Parking District, but the frontage is B3 General Business District. The site currently has a single-tenant commercial building on it. There's 2 curb cuts, as we just mentioned, but there is one on Mulforton Street allowing for egress outside of Orchard Lake. The property is surrounded along the frontage by other B3 uses. To the rear, there's a mix of office and residential. However, those residential lots only include 1 single-family home, and the remainder is a vacant parking lot. The land is designated as non-center type business on the future land use map, and the 2009 master plan compares that non-center type business with businesses permitted in the B3 zoning district. The residential densities map doesn't include a designation for the site. It is a part of the Orchard Lake mixed-use redevelopment area. That area is generally intended to be a walkable mixed-use area. And although that may not be as consistent with an auto-oriented use, the future land use designation of non-center type business is. The applicant has proposed split zoning, or sorry, rezoning the entire property so that it's all B3 rather than being a split zoned property. And the effect of this rezoning wouldn't really change the use that would be allowed because of the frontage. It would only impact the rear of the lot, which as vehicular parking can only accommodate a parking lot. So the front portion of the site is already developed, although there are some nonconformities which may have to be addressed upon a change of use. The commercial zoning of the site is generally compatible with all surrounding uses besides the areas zoned RA4 to the north. So that's as we discussed. There was an application, which is mentioned in the report, to rezone one of the RA4 lots, but that application has been either postponed or rescinded. It's evident that because the frontage is already zoned B3 and there's a curb cut, that it would not have any additional impact on road service on Orchard Lake Road or traffic. There is other land zoned B3 in the city, and some of that is vacant. However, given the fact that this is a split zoned lot, I'm not sure if the demand for B3 is really a consideration here. It does appear that the site could be developed within the standards of the B3 district. However, a car wash specifically would not be able to, it wouldn't have there's a prohibition to adjacency to residentially zoned properties and a requirement that all access be a minimum of 200 feet from an intersection. So there are some challenges with a car wash, but there's not challenges with B3 uses on that site. The intent of the P1 district is to only accommodate vehicular parking uses, and this type of use would not be permitted as on the P1 lot. An amendment to the zoning ordinance would not resolve the conflict of the two, of the matter of it being split zoned. Development in the immediate area has not changed substantially since the adoption of the last master plan. And upon review of whether the zoning request would cause spot zoning, it's clear that given the surrounding uses, the future land use designation, and the logical extension of existing zoning in the area, as well as the rezoning not granting any type of special benefit, means that this would not be at risk of spot zoning. I'd be happy to answer any questions That concludes the report, but I do want to also note that the Planning Commission qualified this rezoning at the February meeting.
Steve?
Yeah, so I guess what portions of what they want to do is not allowed in a P1?
Well, there's no use that's permitted within P1 except for an actual parking lot or an attendant shelter for parking.
Or what?
Or an attendant shelter for parking would be the only
So-
structure that would be permitted.
So stacking?
Stacking, vacuums, all of those things.
Okay, so I guess just for future reference, we're saying vacuums or not.
Well, it'd be a
So,
use that's not permitted in the P1 district.
okay, so, and I know we don't have that many parking ones, but how about EV charging? Would that be allowed?
I believe it would. Because we don't count that as displacing a parking space essentially, so I think through interpretation, it's probably not explicitly called out, but
Okay.
Yeah,
I was just
I mean, we've
thinking
treated it as-
vacuuming and EV charging.
we have treated
Part
it
of
as,
servicing your vehicle.
yes, yeah, we've treated it as a permitted use thus far, so.
Parking space.
Any other questions? Barry?
Does anybody know why it was a P1 to begin with? Wasn't used for buffering, was it?
I'd have to imagine that it probably did have something to do with buffering the residential neighborhood, historically, at least. I mean, I think that was the intent of the P1 district to a large extent.
Is that the home that's behind it? It looks like a multi-bar?
Multi-units.
I believe it's an office use
Yeah.
presently.
Okay.
Office building.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just trying to figure out why would you throw the P1 back there unless it was for a buffer? And because, I mean, I'm in favor of this, but that just, something seemed to be very, very old. How's that?
Dale?
Could you speak to since we're talking about buffering, P1 versus B3? In essence, what would be the difference in terms of the buffering requirement to residential? Does this plan actually have less intense activity versus a parking lot?
Well, the ordinance doesn't actually have any dimensional requirements for the P1 district because there's no structures permitted. So the setback requirements comparatively are obviously, well, they exist in the B3 district. Whereas there's no required buffer besides your parking lot setback, which is 5 feet.
It'd be 10 feet, I believe, for the parking lot. And then you'd have within B3 a 20-foot rear yard setback here and 10-foot side yard setbacks, I believe.
Yeah, there are buffering requirements in section, there's a wall and berm requirement in section 515. And that applies in both P1 and B3. And then you've got your landscaping as well, which would apply in both. So there's not a substantial difference between what you have to do going from P1 to an RA district versus going from B3 to an RA district in terms of, what you have to do to buffer that from the neighboring residential use.
I know we're not looking at a site plan tonight, but in terms of this depiction here, is the buffer that they're illustrating could be in excess of what we would have if it was strictly developed as P1?
Hard to say offhand.
Yeah, it's a hard call to make.
Yeah, without a full site plan in front of us, I'm not sure I could answer that.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? Barry?
I have a question. I'd like to make a motion.
It's a public hearing,
Oh, I'm sorry.
so
Okay.
give me a minute. This
see
is
all
a
the
public,
public's here.
yes, I'm sorry, Danielle.
My question for you guys, I think, what would be the rationale to have two separate zones for one business? So that was a pet supply store. So, and as this reads, it says the front was B3 for the pet supply store, but its parking for same said store was zoned P1. What would be the rationale? How does that occur?
I guess it would just be to prevent the erection of structures on that portion of the lot. So there must have been a reason to not want, construction of a building on that back portion for some reason historically. Because the entire intent of the P1 district was for buffering to a large extent, so there had to have been some consideration at that time for the adjacent uses on the rear of the parcel.
In the past, were there homes down that street? Because right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were more homes than there
It was
are
it's a
today.
platted
Yeah, exactly.
subdivision back there, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have questions?
Just to piggyback on what she's asking, just for knowledge, so the house or building that's next door to it, would that also be like a B3, P1 as well?
No, it's an OS, isn't it?
That's OS1, the one
It's OS1.
behind it.
Yeah, most of the surrounding zoning is small office, and then there's a little bit of RA zoning to the north.
Okay.
Is this one of the streets, do we know if they're talking about widening for the apartment project on the bowling alley site, do you know? Weren't they talking about enhancing some streets in there?
Oh, it wouldn't extend this far. It's further to the east.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Ready for a motion?
It's a public hearing.
Oh, that's right.
Sorry. Let me open the public hearing. Dale?
So P1 is considered a transition zone to residential?
Essentially, yes.
So is P1 required as a transition to office?
In some cases, it's been used that way. It's not required, but it has been used in that manner.
But we
historically.
use P1 transition to residential,
Correct.
but generally not necessarily to office. So it's not the relationship of business B3 to office, is that unusual?
It's yeah, it's kind
A bit unusual, yeah.
It's kind of odd. The intent statement of the P1 vehicular parking district says, the P1 vehicular parking districts are designed to accommodate the off-street parking for those non-residential uses which are not able to provide adequate space within their own district boundaries. That's the whole intent statement of the district.
I think another notable point is that the future land use map from the previous master plan as well didn't include a vehicular parking district, and that vehicular parking is allowed on most commercial, along with commercial uses, or to be an accessory to a commercial use. So the need for that district, besides serving as a buffer, essentially, is not really high in demand.
Yeah, the whole part about it not being able to accommodate parking on site, I don't think we see a lot of that really going on. We haven't really seen the P1 district be used in that manner very much, despite that statement. I think the idea was more of a buffer, certainly.
Thank you.
Okay. This is a public hearing. I'll open the public hearing now. Seeing no one but the proponents are here, so I'm going to close the public hearing now. Now, Mr. Brickner.
Use your hammer.
There, Barry, you feel better now that I use the hammer? He wanted to make a motion.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Barry.
All right. I move that, is that the right one? I had it out here.
It's out here. It's
Wait,
right
I got it,
there.
I got it. I move to recommend to City Council the rezoning request ZR 1-1-2024 dated November 17th, 2023, submitted by Manick and Smith Groups LLC to rezone property located at parcel identification number 22-23-02-103-025, Oakland County, Michigan, from P1 vehicular parking district to B3 general business district be approved.
Kristen supported. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Okay. We'll send it to City Council. Thank you, gentlemen.
It looks like a nice
Yes.
facility. Looks like it's gonna be nice.
I feel like
Pet supplies.
after we just went through the master
Oh, is it
plan,
the-
like
yeah,
there's
I
this
know,
big
but-
gaping hole that we didn't address, or did we address this? I think I'm confused
You'll be going out.
in terms of
You.
some things. It seems like bad zoning, having this B3 in the front and P1 in the back for what should have all been a B3, I guess. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the rationale for how we use it, but is this something we think we need to revisit on the master plan when we go back to review in terms of making sure this is another one of the items that we're looking at to make sure zoning makes sense?
So the master plan is land use, not zoning. And
Right.
this land use is already business. So
So that
The
part's
land
right.
The land use shows it as it would be. As Joe just said, P1 isn't in either the last master plan or the new one.
Or
So even the
one,
last
yeah.
master plan didn't have a P1. It
Right.
showed it as this use, the
So,
proposed
so
use.
either way, it wouldn't be something we necessarily would address in the master plan. It's not
No.
really, okay.
So there's a lot of places in the master plan where it doesn't match current zoning, but until someone comes and asks for rezoning, we don't
Got it.
change it.
Okay, thank you.
You got Barry back.
Yes, Barry?
The reason I raised the issue to begin with was because the only reason I could think that the P1 would be there was because there was residential back there at one time, and the only thing I figured it was for was a buffer so that they could put B3 in the front and still have something in the middle abutting residential. We don't see much, I mean, since I've been around, you don't see much of that anymore. You don't see a lot of people asking for P1 anymore. And, because there's not a lot of land to play with in the city of Farmington Hills anymore. But when you get some older things, I would assume that this particular structure probably predates zoning and predates the city too. It's probably more than 50 years
Probably
old.
predates your PUD. So
Right.
PUD, where you could restrict building up front, parking in back,
Yeah.
didn't even exist until 1978. You didn't adopt it until the mid-'80s. This was probably a way that the city cobbled it together. We're going to zone the front B3 to make sure the building goes there and the back P1 so that the parking goes there, and they're stuck with that. So it was like a cobbled together PUD before PUDs were invented.
So
Yeah,
do we know whether that was a part of a consent judgment that the city went
I
through
don't
on
think
that?
it was a consent.
Yeah, this was not a consent judgment. We would have looked into that as part of the,
I think it was just a way for the city council to say, sure, we like the building, but we want to protect the back and
the rear one.
zone the back P1.
Because this, before it was a pet place, it was the gift store.
They'll always tell us.
Can't remember the
Year
name.
one,
Pier
Pier
1,
one,
yeah.
yeah,
I'm showing my age.
yeah. So I mean, it made sense at the time. Now you would do it with a PUD.
And then Pier 1 moved down the street into West Bloomfield? Is that what happened?
No, I think Pier 1 just went under.
It just went away?
Yeah, it just went by.
Right,
Cheryl, did we vote on this yet, or just talk about it?
We voted on it.
Okay, good.
It was a voice
Item
vote.
5A.
Yeah, we did
Okay,
it.
good.
I'm sorry, I was
Just
just trying to.
wanted to keep everything square. Next item, a regular meeting, zoning text amendment, 1-2024. 34 of the zoning ordinance, amend zoning ordinance to include new subsection addressing electronic messaging center area and to revise regulations regarding additional freestanding sign area set for public hearing. And I guess, Eric, you're a proponent on this?
Actually, Joe's going to be introducing it.
I'll introduce it. Eric is kind of the proponent, I suppose, but
I may chime in. We'll see how.
I'll be his engineer, I guess. A recent review of bonus signs and sign areas for freestanding signs permitted under the zoning ordinance in the expressway service and light industrial districts indicates that there's not a limit on the portion of a sign that may be devoted to an electronic display. So staff came to us to kind of study the issue and see if we could perhaps get the area of the bonus signs down a bit, and then also look at limiting the amount of a sign that could be entirely electronic. So that's what we looked at. And what we came up with, we've got the existing language pertaining to electronic display areas on page 1 there. On page 2 of the memo, we have inserted a small clause in there saying that the electronic display area of a sign shall not exceed 30% of the total sign area or 30 square feet, whichever is larger. So if you have a large sign, the 30% applies, and if you're getting into a smaller sign, then you've got the 30 square feet to work with. So potentially, if you have a very small sign, it could be all electronic, but if you're getting into the larger signs, limiting the total amount of that area that can be electronic. This is, partly trying to think ahead about, electronic large electronic signs aimed at the highway and things like that, and how we might avoid looking like certain areas of Macomb County.
Wait, can you be more clear? Because I'm not understanding the rationale behind why this is in front of us.
Well, in theory, you could have up to a 300 square foot sign in the city, all electronic, like 100% electronic imagery, which would be quite visually impactful for the driver, anybody who lived around there. There's a lot of examples around Southeast Michigan. You see these every now and again, kind of cropping up on highway sides where you have a very large electronic messaging center that's basically creating daylight in the middle of the night, and it's quite, visually impactful.
So you're trying to make it so that it's, to use your term, not so visually impactful for drivers and especially in the nighttime.
It would be the norm for a community to really limit the size of these to something that we're kind of proposing here, where we're really the outlier, and it seems to have perhaps been an oversight in drafting the ordinance that we've allowed them to be this big, because that's just way out of step with what most communities are really allowing in terms of the electronic portion of a sign.
I guess one way to think about it too is, all right, so with the way this language is written, if you were a gas station that wanted to have a highway-oriented sign, you could have your gas prices up there as changeable copy, because that would be a portion of the overall sign, but the whole sign isn't a big LCD screen, basically.
But I don't see any signs around Farmington Hills off the highway.
Not yet.
Yeah, you don't yet, but they're out there.
They're what?
They're testing the water, so we'll see. You may.
The request.
Well, there's been requests for these types of signs, yes. So it's very difficult to meet our illumination standards, but I've actually had one application come pretty close to doing so. And that sign would be 150 square feet, all electronic, on Orchard Lake Road, actually right down the street. I'm not gonna, in a public meeting, really identify that exact location, but there's some things in the works right now that could lead to these happening, so.
Yes, Danielle?
Is there reasoning for wanting these signs so people can actually see what is back there? Because our businesses are set so far off the road that you are already going by it on Orchard Lake before you know what it is. So are you considering that when you're looking, if that's their reasoning, when you're trying to put guardrails around it, are you considering that?
Yeah, and we know, obviously business, they like to have big, bold signage. They like to be able to attract people to their businesses, but it's, at the end of the day, a balance between the community aesthetic and their ability to advertise.
There's actually no change to the primary business identification sign regulations here. It's all the extra signage that are being permitted in the ES district.
Exactly. And this only really pertains to two zoning districts, the LI1 district and the ES district, both of which tend to be oriented closer to the highway to give that kind of opportunity to put up more of a billboard style sign.
Okay. Thank you.
So oh, I'm sorry.
Barry?
Hi,
Then you.
this is more a Tom question. We didn't allow billboard type signs in the city until we kind of got crushed by, was it a Court of Appeals opinion?
I can't remember whether it was Court of Appeals or a federal court case, but yeah, so we allow them. Yeah.
And so then we came up with the zoning that they were only allowed along the expressways. We didn't, and I don't know if at that time they actually were putting out electronic signs, but the only two signs I know of are on 275 between 9 Mile and the Split. I think there's one there I know I see. I think there's a second one over there, and they're all electronic. And from what the thing that I'm having a hard time putting my head around it, and I think Eric just explained a little bit, was, and I'm not hanging by the thing there, the thing that was, I couldn't figure out what we were basically trying to do. So you were limiting the size of the electronic portion of it, but you had to have blank sign, or you had some sign around it. And when you said that you see it for gas stations, and I don't know how many gas stations that we have that are in the ES zoning, along within 50 feet of the expressway, right away. And so I just couldn't figure out, because you basically are talking about setting up a frame around an electric sign and limiting the size of the electric sign to something about 1/2 of what we already have on 275. And then we get stuck with looking at, we've already allowed it, now we're trying to make it smaller. Does that run into a problem with the legality of it?
I'm not sure that anybody ever intended to allow for these to be 150 to 300 square feet. I mean, if anybody has history that I missed in that respect, I don't know that that was really the intent when this ordinance was adopted to allow a electronic messaging center to be that large. I mean,
The
a
only
conventional
signs we have
billboard,
are
sure, but.
electronic. The only signs that are on the expressway that I can see that aren't part of a building, which is regulated by other portions of our ordinances, is those signs on 275, because before that, we didn't allow any signs anywhere in Farmington Hills until that court case came down and we were forced to do it. Then we limited it to the ES zoning and the LI1 zoning. So as long as we allowed it someplace and it wasn't in someone's backyard, you can see that, you have to be 5,000 feet away from a residential. That was fine, but the thing that I can understand all that, okay? But the thing that I was having problems with is you're now limiting the size of the sign, even though we have bigger ones, and you were limiting the size of what could be electronic on the signs, which would make them god-awful looking. Or just be a sign with a big frame around it, or like a TV screen. So, I mean, if that's what you're going at, I'm not really fond of having a partial electronic sign with a frame around.
Typically, it has to be zoned LI1 or yes.
So this is not the freeway area where we've permitted billboards that can be pretty big. This is industrial district where we sort of expect them mostly to relate to the use on the property. And the same thing, the limited expressway service area where when you get right off the freeway. So it's more like for gas stations, for the individual businesses.
So we're not talking about.
I'm really talking about the big sign that you see on 275.
Okay, this is different.
That's within the, what do we call it, the freeway?
The freeway sign zone.
Freeway
I
sign
believe we
zone?
refer to it as.
So this is more relating to a particular business. How much does a particular business get to take up its sign, which we've let be bigger, but I don't think what they're saying is we didn't intend the electronic part of it to be that much bigger.
Okay, so but you're talking about, you're not talking about billboards, you're talking about signs at a business that's has to be in an ES zone or it has to be in the LI1.
Right, that meets this additional bonus signage provision of the ordinance essentially, where, you get a little bit of a bonus provided certain conditions are met. I think it has to be within like 50 feet of a freeway right of way. There's some certain stipulations in there, but you get this bonus in those two zoning districts, provided certain conditions are met.
Steve?
So would this, an example of this be, a gas station, the one that's actually like right on the corner? Today, for the most part, 80% of it is the logo, and then just below it, the electronic is my
Pieces that the
my
price-
unleaded price cash,
Exactly.
unleaded price credit.
Exactly.
And basically, this would prevent them from taking that whole sign and making it electronic. They'll still have to have their, for the most part, their logo, and then the gas prices would be electronic, like they are now.
Right.
Is that basically what this is to solve, is those signs that, again, more like the gas prices being electronic and the rest of it not being electronic?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Kanji?
Would an example be like the hotel at Grand River and Halsted? They have a signage there. Would that be in that area? I'm just trying to understand like the location and what type of sign that you're speaking of.
Yeah, they're in the ES district.
Where is,
So they may have been able to take advantage of the bonus sign provision at that property.
where I'm speaking of, right by the
Might be one of
car
the ones
dealership?
did.
Yeah, yeah, they are zoned ES1, I know that,
Yeah,
so.
they have is that
Okay,
kind of what
yeah,
you're
I
speaking
that
of?
area,
Like a sign like that?
That's a building
Okay,
sign.
okay,
Yeah, I think they're one that has
They have
taken advantage
one.
of it.
yeah.
I think they got in under the wire.
Are we talking about the signs that just got put up on the outside of the city hall that have, that are on Orchard Lake and 11 Mile Road?
Well, that's a whole nother matter, you know, we're not bound by our own.
This
ordinances,
is
so.
not an LI1 or an ES.
Well, it isn't just here, it's the Hawk and it's.
Yes, I
Heritage
know.
Park and
Well, you can have
And don't go on the school property, we don't have control over that.
DPW.
City's exempt, so I'll get it.
That's school
Yes.
property.
Well,
Dale?
Dale, you had something?
Yeah.
They don't listen to us.
So our concern, and correct me if I'm wrong, our concern is electronic sign getting out of control, and we're too generous with the size of our signs. So have we done a kind of proportional analysis of what that looks like? If it's 30% or, I mean, my concern is, does it look like it's a framed small picture that really doesn't function well? So we're reducing the signs in hopes of making sure to control the LED. But I guess I'm not convinced, at least from what I've read, that it's practical in terms of the purpose of the sign, that people can see it, understand it, and it won't be, and it won't be visually obtrusive, that everybody say, okay, the aesthetics are okay, I'm okay with it. You know, but it's kind of important you be able to read it.
Steve.
Yeah, since this is going for a public hearing, I don't necessarily have an issue with it. I think I'm understanding, but for a public hearing, I think you're gonna need some examples of, this is what we're still going to allow, and this is an example of one that would be against the rules, because if someone from the public's, I'm having trouble with it.
It's hard for me because there are a lot of examples locally, like to where I live, but around here, I don't drive around at night much, so I can't like give you a bunch of local examples around here. Joe had mentioned Macomb County, you know, that they have kind of a proliferation of these.
Then
I've seen
show-
them along the 94
then Show
corridor.
a Macomb County, just a
Yeah,
picture of,
yeah.
this is what we don't want, and this would still be allowed under this updated ordinance. And also an idea of, will this make any existing signs, from a size perspective, will it make them non-conforming? Obviously, they'd be grandfathered, but would it make them non-conforming? And how many signs do we think it would make non-conforming? Maybe it's 0?
Yeah.
Maybe it's
Well,
5, maybe it's 50.
we haven't gotten that deep into the analysis, but we at face value don't think it's gonna create a huge amount of
But I
non-conformity in the
think-
city. We don't actually have a whole lot of electronic messaging centers presently,
I
so.
think by the time we have a public hearing, we need those type of answers to see what the impact would be.
Yes,
I
definitely.
mean, so, John, oh, I'm sorry.
Tangi's next. Go ahead.
Who came up with the changing of the size? How did that come about, the numbers?
I would defer to the consultant as to, probably consistent with what other communities are doing in that respect, basically, would be the basis, I would think.
Which communities?
I'd have to look back at my analysis, but yeah, it was partly just discussion with staff, and then also as far as the one in item D down at the bottom of page 2, that is actually a standard size for that type of sign. So the 200 square feet is not going to seem unusual from an industry standpoint.
Dale?
I mean, Steve raised a really good point about establishing nonconformity, and if folks come in and they got a nonconforming size sign, and they want to retrofit it to an LED, what's our position? Are we going to tell them you got to tear the whole side down, conform with our size or our sign, and here's your proportion of your LED you can use? So, I mean, for the public hearing, I think that's important to know. How is that going to be handled? Or are we going to have a hybrid? Yeah, okay, you can keep your 150, your 200 square feet. You got to stick to 30%, not to exceed 30 square feet or whatever. So that would be kind of like, I don't know if that makes sense. So I think it'd be good to kind of know where you guys are at when you get those requests, and you're going to get them to want to update our sign, but we don't want to tear that sucker down. We're going to use what we got, and we're going to make it flashy with what we got.
Yes, Barry?
When I'm looking at this, I mean, I can see, I don't mind so much N, but O and P, I don't like that. I'm going to take the Glenn Fleischacker approach to this. He hated lollipop signs, and what you're basically talking about here are lollipop signs. You have a 40-foot sign, which is a long pole with something on the top. We've been getting rid of those, and we've been making them mostly 8 feet tall.
Yep.
And that's
As
why you
most
don't,
communities have, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's characteristic of all communities have been moving in that direction. You're seeing lollipop signs go away all over Michigan.
yeah, but not in Farmington Hills. And with these dimensions that you're talking about, a maximum of 30 feet and a maximum of 40 feet, that's a lollipop sign. I don't think we really need to go back to lollipop signs. You want to keep them at 8 feet and 64 square foot sign, which is about 8 by 8. That's not huge.
But again, we're talking only within these kind of freeway-oriented zoning districts
Yeah, but
where the
why
larger
do we-
signage is
why
going to
do
be
we
for the
need a-
highway passer.
Why do we need a 30-foot or a 40-foot sign?
I don't believe that we necessarily do from an aesthetic standpoint, quite frankly.
Right,
but
they're permitted
it's-
now, but we certainly aren't attached to them.
Right, exactly.
Were they permitted now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Why don't
those-
we get rid of it?
It's a fair question.
I'm open to that.
Because I don't know, I haven't seen, since, the gas stations used to have those large signs. They weren't LEDs, but you know, because we always were concerned that Glenn would take his Jeep and run and pull them down because he said he would. But the thing is, if we're trying to become a more modern city, which we're supposed to be, why would we go backwards in time and start talking about 30 and 40-foot signs? We don't have buildings that are that tall in this town, so why should we have a sign that tall? So I don't think that should be an option.
Well, that's why this whole thing was out of context to me when I got into understanding that this is what the
Sure,
ordinance
yeah.
permitted. It just seemed kind of out of step with the whole historical intent of what we're trying to do here in Farmington Hills, quite frankly. I mean, I'd been told a story that they were on the top of the, Southfield Town Center, looking out, and all they saw was darkness in Farmington Hills. And they said, that's the way we want it there. And that was kind of the historical, basis for all the lighting regulations and everything else that kind of grew out of that,
Yeah,
that
but
understanding that we want to be a kind of,
when the maximum size of a building in our town is like 4 to 5 stories high, and in Southfield, the building you were talking about was what, 30 stories high or 26? It's 23 stories. I used to be in that building. So, but that's not basically what you're saying here. This is more like a standalone sign with a, or you're just saying that you could have it 40 feet up in the air on the side of a building, and that would go underneath another ordinance that deals with how
wall
much
signage.
percentage
That
of
would
the
be on
building
the
side you can
wall
use.
sign, yeah.
right.
So I'm not in favor of anything that would resemble a lollipop.
I
Danielle?
tend to agree.
In the LI1 district, are there any homes?
That's the industrial, just light
I
industrial
know what it
district.
is. My question is, are there any homes around there?
It's possible along 8 Mile back.
Yes, along 8 Mile, but you would not be able to meet the other conditions. Those would be more specific to like actual industrial parks that adjoin like 275. If you went down to 8 Mile and tried to meet the criteria of being like 50 feet within a freeway right away, you just couldn't meet those other conditions essentially. So you would not see these crop up really anywhere near existing residential.
Okay. I asked the question because I'm trying to understand who is aggrieved by the potential of these signs that we have to put this ordinance in.
I think it's a more community-wide impact for every traveler that passes our community on the highway, all of these different, it's kind of a larger overall community image thing, I think is how we look at it, rather than it aggrieving any particular property owner or specific, group. It's a more overarching aesthetic consideration for the city.
Anybody else? No?
I just, John?
Yes.
I mean, I just think we come back, there's some illustrations, some pictures of what signs we're talking about, the examples. I mean, in the old days, getting into the sign orders was a big darn deal. I mean, we did major research, and we had albums of pictures and examples, and like tonight, I mean, we're making an adjustment to accommodate LED, but then it leads into discussion about lollipop signs and heights and stuff like that. So it does have the possibility of spinning off into many, many issues. I think if you want to keep it focused, I think you really should kind of focus on the two districts, show us some visual examples of what we're talking about, what signs. And then for me, it's whether or not it's practical. We're imposing a practical regulation that you can still see the sign at a speed you're going or whatever. Then I think, can make a judgment about that. And I think the public would have a better idea of making a judgment about it. This to me seems a little bit kind of, I don't say subjective, but just kind of vague in terms of what it really means practically when I look at it. So.
And to that point, I guess I would also like to take a minute and talk to Steve Jopik, and, because I know he was involved in the creation of the freeway zone signs and this, and I just want to make sure when I talk to him that, some of the height issues didn't relate to not getting sued again. So when we come back for the public hearing, we'll address that as well and see if there was a basis for that height.
Do we want that before we even set it for public hearing, so we can have
Well,
discussion?
that's my question. I was going to ask for Eric and Joe. Can you guys put together what Dale and Steve have mentioned about examples and get it ready by the next by April?
Yeah, is there a rush for this?
We might be learning by example what these look like pretty soon.
What's that?
I think we'll be seeing in reality what these look like pretty soon if we don't keep this moving, so.
So we better keep it on track for April then, April hearing? Yeah. Eric?
Yeah, that's the hope, is to keep this on track for
Okay,
April.
yes, Danielle?
So no, we shouldn't, because we just sat here and asked you for information that we need so that we can educate ourselves. I do not want to be sitting up here again where we are asking y'all questions because we truly, truly just don't understand what's going on. This has been an illuminating conversation, and thank God we don't have the public sitting out here listening to it. But what harm is it to give us an opportunity in April to understand and talk to you about it and then move forward? We're not trying to hold you up, but I think it's better if the commissioners are well-informed.
Yes. Joe?
April public meeting, what else is on the agenda?
A lot of things, probably 7 to 8 items, so.
Okay, then I don't think if we had plenty of time to talk about it in a public meeting, I would say go ahead. But if we've got a very busy public meeting as it is, then I think we should have more information. And the additional information I'd also like to see is simply a map of the areas where this would be affected.
I would also point out that a key, kind of key consideration with this is that obviously under, case law, we can't regulate the content of a sign.
Sure.
You could get 150 to 300 square feet of anything, of any kind of content virtually. Let's just put it in that perspective as well, so. All electronic, moving around, flashing, doing all kinds of different things, so. It's,
I got the impression, just hearing you after I spoke, that there's someone coming in with something that if we don't make a change to the ordinance as it stands right now, it would fit under the current ordinance, and this is meant to set not restrictions, but guidelines for people in the future to follow. And we might not have that much future to deal with if we don't do it soon.
this particular sign will have a tremendous visual impact on the Orchard Lake corridor. That is really the more specific impetus for all of this, to look at, this ordinance in this light.
So that's why, and you want it done in April? Is that what you're saying?
That's the hope, is that we have an applicant in the pipeline, essentially, so.
It's still got to go to council.
Right. Yes, Dale?
They have to do a public.
So, and I appreciate Danielle's comments and the judgment of the planning commission. Are we on for, was it April 18th? Is that our next meeting?
18th is the next date.
Okay, I will not be here for that meeting. Oh, really? So I would like to participate in it, but I understand if it's got to move, it's got to move. But that's just my practical suggestions in terms of what does it mean if we look at it. If it can be moved to May, that'd be fine. If not, you got to do it. You got to do it, I understand. But I will not be here for the April meeting.
Okay. Yes, Stan?
What can the information be given to us prior to April?
Yeah, that's what we're going to work on, is trying to get you the information in advance to the extent that we can.
Can you have it done by the end of the month, end of March?
End of March.
It's like 2 weeks.
No, it's next
1
week.
week.
Can you have it to us?
Time
next week?
flies when you're retired.
I mean, maybe like first week of April, realistically.
Okay. All right, first week in April. Joe?
No,
Yes, Steve?
Yeah.
I didn't say anything.
I mean, we'll have an opportunity to discuss it. Hopefully, we'll have lots of time to look at this beforehand. So, but I'm going to move that zoning text amendment 1, 2024, which proposes to amend the Farmington Hills Code of Ordinance, Chapter 34, zoning, Article 5.0, site standards, Section 34-5.5, signs to include the new subsection 34.5.5.3.a.ix.h, addressing the area of electronic messaging centers be set for public hearing for the Planning Commission's next available regular meeting agenda.
I'll second that.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion at this point? Yes, Barry?
I'm not really in favor of what's being presented. I do think it should go to public hearing, and I should hope that we could get some better ideas by the time before public hearing, so that we have better clarification for members of the commission and for the public. But I'm going to support this because everyone has a right to say something.
Okay. We're ready for, yes, yes.
And I'm with Barry. That's basically my attitude right now regarding this draft.
Steve?
Yeah, also, take a look at the height and just see if we should be looking at that as well. Talking to Barry's concerns, see what other communities are doing with regards to height and what impact that has if we wanted to lower it.
We see the community. We ride by on the highway and see the signs ourselves.
See a lot of money.
Yeah.
We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right.
I abstain.
Right, we had
Yeah,
one,
I don't-
abstain.
Oh, well then nay.
Okay. Your first no vote, Danielle, right?
Actually, it's not my first. This is the first y'all paid attention to.
Protest vote.
Yeah, right.
But this motion, it is based on us getting information ahead beforehand.
Right, yes. First week in April, right, Eric?
It's just putting it
Yep,
up.
that's our goal.
Okay.
You can say no.
So Tanji, you voted aye?
Plenty of public
Did you vote
comment.
yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Next item is public comment. There is no one here from the public. Commissioner comments? Joe?
I have no comments, thank you.
Don't we have meeting minutes?
Meeting minutes?
Yeah, we have to do the minutes first.
Oh, I jumped over that. I'm sorry.
How about, that's my comment.
Do we have any additions or corrections to the minutes of the 15th of April? For those of us that were here.
Which was not many of us.
February 15th minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes.
A second.
Been moved and seconded. Is this the 6 o'clock? You doing them separately or together?
I'm going to do them together.
Okay,
I'm going to do both.
both. It's been moved and supported. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved. Now, commissioner comments. Barry?
Do you want to make a comment?
I don't have it.
If you're talking about lights, there's a gas station at the corner of 9 Mile and in Middle Belt that looks like the sun when you drive by. It is kind of bright.
Yeah, there's actively enforcement. They're working with the property owner on that particular site as we speak.
Good.
Angie?
I was just trying to think in my head.
All right, we'll come back.
Thinking, no comments.
Dale?
Well, I mentioned the time we got in here about the fiber project that's going throughout the city.
Yep.
They're working within the right of way, or at least that's the plan, to put sleeves in and then put fiber eventually.
Yep.
Is there like a time frame, or is that like an open-ended permit?
2 years.
It's open-ended. There's no,
It's supposed to be a 2-year project, isn't it?
I'm sure their goal, correct?
2-year project. Yeah.
Well, just FYI too, I don't know if insurance not represented tonight, but they're getting on private property. So I still know, that you have to get permission to get on private property to work. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an important issue. And I know they try to stay within the confines of the right of way. But in our example, there are people on people's private property operating with no communication with the residents. So I think we need to do a better job of communicating with the residents, especially if it ends up on their property. Even though it's supposed to be a great resource to have the fiber in front of our houses.
Yeah, I had to go out and ask them, like, well, what are you doing here? Like, what's going on? But they left, like in the yards, my subdivision, those little, the green, there's some green.
The boxes.
So are those gonna turn into a box and it's gonna stick out of your
No, it's
yard
gonna be
now?
I think it's grade level. There is a guy, and I'll look for his number.
Grade
There's
level?
a guy that
Like
lives.
flat?
Yeah. The company's based out of England, SoFi, and there's a guy here that lives near 13 Orchard, he's a resident, that's like the project, because they buried a truck in my front yard when they were digging and it snowed, and I called him, and he came out and repaired it, and he's actually an attorney, I found out, but he came out and cleaned it up and gave me his name and number, and so I'll share it with you guys, and if you have questions of the.
Yeah, and you can call the city as well. It's a permit to be in the right of way throughout the entire city. It was approved a year and a half ago. It's a very difficult concept to say no to that. I mean, it's a standard permit that the state of Michigan essentially has prepared. So, but yeah, if they're going outside the right of way and on a regular basis, we should know about that. So, yeah.
Can you explain what a right-of-way is?
So the right-of-way is the public road right-of-way for, let's just say a subdivision street is gonna be 30.
I mean, essentially
7
between the
feet
sidewalk and the center line of the road.
Also,
guess-
if you have fire hydrant in your street, that's at the edge of the right of way.
So the right-of-way is not just the pavement. The right-of-way extends on either side of the pavement. There's usually utilities underground. There's usually a sidewalk. Rule of thumb, just from one side of from the sidewalk.
No.
We don't have sidewalks.
Yeah, I guess if you don't have sidewalks, yeah, good
To
point.
you, and I'm like,
So
I'm
now
not.
it's
Let's just say, in my
grass.
neighborhood,
If I
we just
may,
have streets,
I'm
maybe
going to
5 feet
speak
from the
up
pavement.
and say, as a rule of thumb, what you're seeing is they put yellow flags down where the gas line is.
Yes,
If it's inside that gas line, it's inside the right of way.
right.
If it's on the other side of the gas line, it may or may not be
Right.
in the right of way.
You could have
But
60
you're right, they have a right to go.
So I'm in
those flags.
Independence Commons, 4 to 5 feet outside the pavement-ish.
Well,
Okay, so they were in Quaker Valley last week, week before.
Okay.
And those yards are anywhere from 3/4 of an acre to 2,
Yeah.
and they're in the backyard.
So there can be a right-of-way in the back, there can
Yeah.
be.
If you've got an
easements.
Edison line, you've got right of way.
An easement.
It's not right-of-way, but it could be some other
Yeah.
easement.
But, to their point, I don't think everybody understands, I certainly don't until you just explained it. Has there been from the city a communication to the neighbors to understand what's going on?
Yeah.
What's happening to them?
I found out when they dug for the gas line.
Right,
They told me
exactly.
what was happening. But
Yeah.
also, I wonder why they didn't do it in the backyard. Why not the back instead of the front? Just
So,
easier.
SoFi is a right-of-way, this particular company, if that's, remember, there are several companies operating at all times in the city. Some are doing the SoFi stuff in the right-of-way, others can be working in a easement in the backyard. There are many different kinds of companies. The one that I think we're talking about, putting in the broadband along the edge of the pavement, they're, they're SoFi, I can't remember. what it is.
SoFi,
yeah.
S-O-F-I.
So they have what's called they have a right-of-way permit to do that work. I don't know that any of their permit goes to the backyard, so that could be some other company. So most of the SoFi stuff will just be in the right-of-way, and it's hard to give notice. They essentially have a permit to be in all of our right-of-way, like throughout the city.
They're building a head end behind Station 4 on Drake Road, next to the dumpster, and then another one here on City Hall property.
So they, in addition to the
Right of way.
the stuff that they put in the right of way, and it's only like 12, 16 inches below ground. They are building some occasional huts and other things with city approval that has been approved over the last 12
As long
months
as
or
it's
so.
gonna be flat, because right now I have 2 poles like sticking up. I mean,
so
the
do I.
trip, it's like a trip hazard.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like,
And it's right, one is right near my mailbox.
So
Engineering department is fielding all those
So
calls.
what they've done is they initially probably put sleeves under
that's
your
exactly right.
driveway and put 2 ends up. They're gonna probably trench,
Yep.
where those ends come
they're-
up,
they're
they'll probably
tre-
trench your
they're
lawn.
trenching along Drake Road now and covering
They
it.
will trench.
Coming back and
You'll
covering
get
it with
a
grass.
trenching, and they'll backfill and then seed it, and that'll be
Yes.
that.
Okay.
And they call it a micro trench because it's not like a big backhoe. It's a
No.
small,
It's about
yeah.
that wide.
Right.
Yes, very.
To explain a little, usually the right-of-way is from the center of the street to the sides, and if, in my neighborhood, we don't have sidewalks, but the right-of-way is probably 16 feet up on my grass.
Right.
In mine, it's 17 feet. So it can be awfully big.
But the thing is,
And
it
I'm in a
also,
sub.
the other question is where do your power lines and your phone lines and everything come from? They come from the front, you might come from the back, and those are all easements.
Yeah, no, the easement's on your deed. I mean,
Either
that's
side.
Yeah.
part of your,
No, it's not on your deeds, it's
But it's
subject
on
to
your
restrict,
subject-
yeah,
yeah, you have
yeah.
Your mortgage.
And easements,
yeah,
correct.
yeah, schedule on your schedule, A or B.
Okay, we've been here an hour.
Sorry about that.
Anybody else have any comments?
8 days.
Okay,
Deed
I'll look
restriction.
for a motion to adjourn.
I motion we adjourn. Oh, sorry.
Second,
It's all right, I just need a second now.
second.
Moving, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
MRTA.
we are adjourned.
Just talking